ground. Ain't nobody turns around. Step on up, you can claim the highest star. Straight ahead, it's not very far. Yeah. Keep on. Keep on. With the strength of your mind, you can be set free. You can overcome your past. Search deep inside, and you will see. Time has come at last.
Good afternoon, good evening. Hello, how are you this evening? The end of another great day. But did you ever imagine what goes on in a news station where they are typically reporting the news and are really expected to be the news? Interesting kind of topic today. Here to share his insights after decades of leadership on TV news programs in cities like Chicago, St. Louis, and Detroit, Mort Meisner is turning the lens on his own life in his recently penned book entitled Enough to be Dangerous. This memoir exposes personal stories that are as shocking and scandalous as anything he aired during his newscast, or that we might see on newscast. All right? Mr. Meisner, welcome to Urban Reality.
Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Or I should say good evening.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I tell you what, we just want to, what we're going to do in about 2 minutes, we're going to go to a break. But if you could tease us up for us, tell us, a little bit about your book and what we can expect to uncover on the other side of the break.
Yeah, glad to do it. You know, the book opens up with me in the middle of a race riot in 1960 when I was a little boy at Edgar Guest School at Fankel and Myers, and it was the first time I saw hate on display. And certainly I had no idea at that point I would become a vice president of a TV news network or station, which I did many years later. And so I worked inside the news industry at a very high level, hiring and firing the anchors and making coverage decisions, what we covered, what we didn't cover. And in fact, when we have a chance to talk after the break, would love to talk about some of the most important stories are ones that didn't make it on the air. And by way of a little tease, there was a story that the late Mayor Coleman Young pleaded with me and asked me not to air, and I didn't air it because he was afraid it would cause an insurrection in the Detroit Police Department. So I'm anxious to talk about that.
Absolutely. Well, we will do that just on the other side of the break. We're talking with Mort Meisner, who is the author of a new book called Enough to be Dangerous. Why don't you stay tuned? Call a friend, tell them that we're on. You can join the conversation, 313-778-7600. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Urban Reality. We are here today talking with Mort Meisner here on this wonderful day, and really trying to get at the core of his book entitled Enough to be Dangerous. It is a memoir that exposes personal stories that are as shocking and scandalous as anything you may have seen on television. And just before the break, we kind of introduced Mr. Meisner as well as his book. And so, this really talks about some pretty discriminatory types of things, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, for example, and I want to keep it real and, in talking about Detroit, I of course worked in Detroit, Chicago, St. Louis at network stations. But, Yeah, I mean there was a great pattern of discrimination against minorities, blacks specifically, and also women in our industry. Has it gotten better? Yeah, but there's a long way to go because we have very few blacks in management. So the people making decisions about what gets on the air are generally white men over 50. And so that's why sometimes we see stories on the air that perhaps maybe should have been on the air, and we wind up missing things that should be. So there's a chapter in my book called The Garbage Men, and where that came about was when I was working at CBS in Chicago way back in the 80s. Every newsroom practically in the country had one black man. Usually he was the low man on the totem pole that would be given the stories that they felt he could, quote, handle and wouldn't, quote, mess up. And there was one boss in particular who would just say, well, let's give that story to the garbage man. And it was reprehensible. It was something I fought against for a long time, and it was one of the reasons I left one station for another. And our very own beloved Al Allen, who worked for me at WJBK, when I took over the station, it was apparent he had been treated very badly by previous management. I figuratively embraced Al, and I'm proud to say with incredible hard work, Al made himself into a very, very good reporter, but not before being dumped on for many years. And it was wrong then, it's wrong now, and there's still room for this to get better.
So with all your years of experience, why write this book? Why write this book, and why write it now? We're in the middle of, some civil unrest. We got a lot kind of going on, and there are a number of people who really are feeling, like this could be the time to turn the corner on race relations and to look at sexism and so forth. Why write this book now and release it?
Yeah. So I started writing the book about 2.5 years ago. And so what's going on in the country now, obviously I knew the climate we were living in, but I didn't anticipate it would be like this. So I do think it's timely, because I think until we look at ourselves in the mirror, change doesn't happen. I mean, I'm very happy to see NBC, I'm calling them out in a positive way, has just named a gentleman who I know very well by the name of Anzio Williams as vice president for diversity. Well, normally those jobs are meaningless. In this case, it's not meaningless, and he's going to have a major hand in making sure there's more people that have the opportunity to be Lester Holt, to become decision makers from a minority point of view. And because newsrooms should certainly reflect the communities that they're serving. And that's why I was so proud when I was able to hire Huel Perkins and bring him to WJBK back in the early 90s. But we need more men and women like Huel. And I think unless we scrutinize ourselves, change will never, ever come. And I talk in the book about things I witnessed in my own personal life, racially, and things in the industry. And the story I started talking about before the break, back in the late 1970s, when I was at Channel 7 in early 80s, I was tipped off there were a group of white cops in the Detroit Police Department. They called themselves WOLF, White Officers Looking for Equality. And they would they would get together and wear wolf heads and burn crosses in their own backyard. But the point was, we got tipped off. We went out. We did a story on it, but none of the officers were willing to take their masks off, so we could never really confirm that who we were talking to was really a cop. And we went to Mayor Young at the time, I did, and he begged us in his most salty language not to run the story because, A, we couldn't confirm they were cops, even though I knew they were, but Mayor Young felt it would cause potentially civil unrest in the city and an insurrection in the police department. And I still have that video. It's never seen the air. And while I understood Mayor Young's point of view and the point of view of my bosses at ABC, it was something that was really quite compelling.
And so now you find yourself in a position, and I guess the real push here is you want to get this information out so that people, one, understand more, about what's happening in newsrooms, that it's not just isolated to corporations and other companies, but that the place that people, turn to get information, that in fact, there's some practices going on there that would make their head spin. And I wonder if you think that feeds into the narrative that if it bleeds, it leads, and that some news outlets, would rather talk about the negative stories that are happening in African American communities in particular, versus tell you the kind of stories that would be just the opposite.
Well, this is a great, great question and point. Here's the thing. I've never worked in a newsroom where the mantra was, if it bleeds, it leads. However, news management can often be lazy. I don't think it's the case here in Detroit. I don't. However, crime is the easiest thing to cover. There's a murder. There's a robbery. You send a crew. You get the grieving relatives. You get video of the bad guy. But you're not really educating the public. And I think newsrooms need to invest more time in consumerism, investigative reporting. In our town here, channels 2, 4, and 7 all do a good job, but they could all do a lot less stories about fender benders and nickel and dime stories. But what really does aggravate the hell out of me is when police and newsrooms seem to give more credence to the death of a white person than the death of a black person. Meaning, if you have a kidnapping and or a murder in lily white suburbia, it gets a hell of a lot more play than one in an urban area. And again, it goes back to decision makers very often. That's wrong. One such story that I talk about in the book was the case many years ago where a black woman had her child kidnapped. The cops felt it was a domestic issue. They didn't really lend resources to it. And 3 months later, they found the little boy raped and murdered in the attic of the next door neighbor, who, by the way, happened to be white. Had they done an appropriate, proper search, they might have saved the child's life at the beginning. But the woman was dismissed, and I'm here to say, because she was black. And again, this begs for more blacks in management. And I think that's really, really important because in order to have an understanding of whether it's black people, Indian people, Hispanic people, Asian people, you need people in the decision-making process who have lived it. And I think it's really quite important.
Yeah.
I don't like saying things like, the black community, this community, because that makes it sound like all blacks live together, all Indians live together, and they don't. But when you talk about an urban area, it's important.
Yeah. And so when people pick up this book, they're going to learn a lot more about you as a human being. They're going to learn about your experiences. And certainly the question will come up about, why is this man who is not African American exposing stories that happen to African American? Why does he, even care enough? And here, something that was in your book was, my 7-year-old mind could not comprehend their fury over plans to bust black students whose school had burned down. Right? To me, it was great that they could come here and attend Edgar Guest Elementary School, named for a poet who celebrated optimism about everyday life. My naivete was more like Mr. Guest's philosophy because I was excited for new kids to join our school and become our friends. In fact, my imagination had spun idyllic visions of smiling children descending the steps of big yellow buses. Somehow, though, I feared something bad was about to happen. What happened?
Yeah. So there was a school in Detroit. You actually just gave me goosebumps listening to that, even though it was my own writing. There's a school in Detroit called McCarroll, and it had burned. So they bused these black children, otherwise known back then as colored kids, as the parents called them, into my school at Frankel and Myers. And all I can say is the parents in the neighborhood I lived in, I was very poor, were what I call white trash. They were there to meet the buses. They were shouting the N-word at children, little children. And one parent, a woman, threw a rock, hit a little boy in the face, busted his face open, busted his glasses open. And there I was at age 7 watching hate on display, and it's impacted me my whole life. And I do want to point out, one of my children is black. She was adopted, and so that also has caused me to even redouble my efforts and my thought process about racial harmony, racial tensions. But what I witnessed back in 1959 or 1960 has stuck with me forever and will until the day that I die.
Yeah. We often talk when we get to topics like sexism and racism and homophobic and everything else about how cyclical these categories are. I mean, you just threw out a year where I can tell you I wasn't even born yet. 1959 and 1960, but then to be here in 2020, on the cusp of 2021, and we are seeing some of the same challenges go on. I mean, it's not just African American. Matter of fact, here, if you would, finish these sentences for me. I don't mind hearing a gay man or two in the newsroom, but...
Yeah, but I don't want a newsroom full of them. That was a boss of mine when I worked at WJBK. I won't name his name for right now because it doesn't even matter. But I was called into his office one time and in that same meeting, he referred to blacks and gays, that I don't mind having some of them, but I don't want a newsroom full of them. Well, happily, that person has not been there for a long time and is out of the business.
Yeah. Even to the degree that the next one, if you finish this one, if he doesn't work out, we'll never be able to.
Yeah. If he doesn't work out, we'll never be able to fire him. That's something.
Who were they
the first time I heard that was at CBS, where I had wanted them to hire a man who I like. Big voice, handsome guy, good journalist. And they said, well, it seems like he's got a black chip on his shoulder. And if it doesn't work out, we'll be stuck with him. We'll never be able to fire him. Well, you would never say that about a white person. You just wouldn't. And
Yeah.
You know, on the other hand, I was part of the team that hired Oprah Winfrey. I was very happy about that, very proud of that. You know, Oprah, you know, we don't need me to confirm this and affirm it. Great person, great talent, and she's everything that's right about the media. Gives back to all communities. Guys like Huel Perkins, Diana Lewis, you know, I think one of the greatest female anchors ever anywhere in our country. Same with Carmen Harland and Kim Gill. So there's a lot that's good, but the biggest place the news media has got to get their act together is in management.
Yeah. You know, in an industry driven by competition, Mort is known as an honest critic and honest businessman. Grace, you're on with Mort Meisner. You got a question or a comment?
I guess a little bit of both. I guess a little bit of both, and how you're distinguished guest. I'm impressed, and I was going to assume that he was Caucasian until he came out and actually just gave us his race. Did you write a book? Because I think other white men or other white people need to read what you are literally saying, because we as African Americans, and especially me, and I've been abroad, and I've spoken and been at tables with different people. What you're saying, that is not a common conversation. It is not. You need to bottle that up. And we really need to hear that, your version, and it's really, really straight talk. We need to hear it more. But overall, your people, male or female, need to hear that. It was refreshing to hear you talk just as candid, and it came across genuine.
Yeah. Well, I will say that there's so many people, black and white, in the industry of trying to make things better. And, you know, men like Huel Perkins can have what I call the bully pulpit. When he talks, people listen. And he's very involved in the community. But being a Caucasian, someone that lived it, I make most of my money in the industry. So a lot of people said, well, I could hurt my business. But it hasn't. And I don't think that it will. But this is something that, you know, I've talked the talk for years, and I've always taken pride in walking the walk when it comes to race relations as well.
Absolutely very refreshing. And you guys were speaking about also, too, how black people in the neighborhood are depicted, and you go to a family and you get that good picture of them displaying sadness and crying and all that performance. We have no control of that. We're not at the table of making those particular decisions about how we are depicted. And I've always had a problem with, they go get the most, and not to really insult anybody, but the most ignorant-looking black person they can find and put a mic in his face or her face, and it's like, wow, really? You couldn't find somebody else to speak sentence?
And that's a very sensitive, cogent point you raised. And it's funny. What was your name again, ma'am?
Grace. Mm-hmm.
Grace, you really hit the nail on the head. When I had reporters come back with interviews with people that couldn't string three words together, I said, couldn't you get someone who could be someone that could communicate a little bit better? Well, this was the first person that came up to me. Well, that's not a good enough reason. You're a reporter. Get your big butt out there and dig. Sometimes it can be challenging. It can be difficult. The whole concept of eyewitness news, as we know it, was getting eyewitnesses to the news. And, you know, again, we can always do better, and I think you raise a tremendous, tremendous point.
Fantastic. Thank you for calling, Grace.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have something else you were going to say? We had a couple of callers on the line. I want to try to get to them, but if you have something else, go ahead. Did Grace leave?
I guess she is.
Oh, she may have. Okay.
Hey, Ed,
well, we got Joe.
Take another call, and then I'm in fact standing in the lobby of a restaurant waiting, but I'd love to take one more call.
Good. Okay. All right. Well, then fine. We'll have Joel. You got a question or comment before Mort has to leave?
Yeah. She said, Finkel and Myers, like I'm like 64 years old. I understand where he's coming from, and I was bused back then to an all-white school. They're very vicious, and the tables was against me at that time, and now he's telling the truth. White America know what they done to black people, but then and again, we're the ones that always appease everybody but ourselves. They demolished our school system, but don't nobody want to talk about it. Tell the truth, guy.
Well, I know this. I know this. As I said, I have a black daughter, therefore I have a black grandson, too. And
I know you're afraid. I know you're afraid every time they step out.
Yes.
We're the only people that,
but
we can't go across country in peace. We can't go across country in peace.
My godson is Larry Foote Jr., the former Michigan player and Pittsburgh Steeler.
From Royal Oak Township, from Larry Foote Sr.
And Larry Foote Sr. is one of my best friends. And
I grew up with him. He went to school with my peoples.
What's your name?
Kennedy is the last name.
Yeah, well, I can tell you, anytime my godson comes back to Detroit, he always bitterly complains, says, Uncle Mort, on the way over to see you, I got stopped for being black. Where did it happen? Berkeley. Where did it happen? Royal Oak. Where did it happen? Beverly Hills.
Ferndale, Hazel Park, that's the end trap there. And between Oak Park, between Greenfield, all the way down to Gratiot, that's the end trap. And when they made Myers there, that was Ferndale gold mine.
Yep.
That's the end trap. They need to have.
Right. You sound like my old friend Adolph Mongo.
I know him quite well. But I tell you one thing. America know what they done to black America. Come on now, be fair. All we ask is for a chance to live. We helped build this country, but y'all want everything. Stop being greedy.
All right, Joe. Thanks for calling Urban Reality. We appreciate it. Mort, so as you get ready to leave, just tell us how can we get a hold of your book?
I'd be honored to be on again. It's currently a bestseller. I'm very humbled on Amazon. You can get the book at Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, or you can go to the Book Beat in Oak Park or the Paper Trail in Royal Oak. And I'm honored, really, and humbled to be on with you, Ed, and would love to be on again for a longer duration if you think it's appropriate.
Absolutely, Mark. We certainly want to have you back. Obviously, you can tell that people really gravitate to it. You know a lot of people, and people are glad that you're speaking the truth. So good luck to you in your future.
Well, thank you so much. Take care.
All right, sir. We'll have you back on.
Step until you reach higher ground. Let nobody turn